Hello there! Welcome back to my channel. You may call me Miss Introvert, and today we are going to be looking at some basic fundamentals that will help you start writing poetry. If poetry is something that you like writing or reading, or that you're just starting to get interested in, then this is just a small guide that will help you understand the basic concepts and get more excited about it. Now without further ado, let's begin. Number 1, start reading poetry. If you want to get better at writing poetry or even start writing poetry, the best thing you can do is start reading poetry. This will help you to get inspired and also help you to understand the literary elements and all the other basic concepts of writing a poem. But when you're reading poetry, you're not just reading through it. Poetry is another form of very detailed, expressive art, sometimes only having implied meanings that you have to figure out. So imagine it like you're analyzing a very important painting, if you like that simile. Or you could annotate the elements that you're finding as you're analyzing it. Definitely start small, because there are still a lot of very complicated and long poems that the smartest scholars still don't understand. And remember that art is subjective, so just like the criticism or interpretation of readers' response, you might get one thing out of a poem and someone else might get something else out of it. Maybe you relate to the speaker, or the theme, or the emotions and feelings conveyed. A good example of this is a poem called Pretty Ugly by Abdullah Shawit. It's a poem in which you can get either one of the meanings that the poem is expressing out of it. Pretty ugly. I'm very ugly, so don't try to convince me that I'm a very beautiful person, because at the end of the day, I hate myself in every single way. And I'm not going to lie to myself by saying there is beauty inside of me that matters, so rest assured that I will remind myself that I am a worthless, terrible person, and nothing you say will make me believe I still deserve love, because no matter what, I am not good enough to be loved, and I am in no position to believe that beauty does not exist within me. Because whenever I look in the mirror, I always think, am I as ugly as people say? Now, if you read from the bottom up, you get a different message, which is the exact opposite. Am I as ugly as people say? Because whenever I look in the mirror, I always think beauty does exist within me, and I am in no position to believe that I am not good enough to be loved, because no matter what, I still deserve love, and nothing you say will make me believe that I'm a worthless, terrible person. So rest assured, I will remind myself there is beauty inside of me that matters. And I'm not going to lie to myself by saying I hate myself in every single way. Because at the end of the day, I'm a very beautiful person. So don't try to convince me that I'm very ugly. This was clearly, obviously, a poem that contrasts the two different meanings by reading either backwards or upwards. But there's still the mystery of what the speaker actually thinks about themselves. Do they think they're beautiful and they think they're ugly? Do they sometimes have feelings of both? And there's definitely that meaning that we can feel one way at some time and then feel completely the opposite the other time. We just have to find a different way to read how we're feeling and find different ways to interpret that, if that makes any sense. I feel like I really want to go into more detail about this poem. So if you want to skip to the next point, you totally can. There's still more to this point, but I just want to say that it's a beautiful poem that talks about, sometimes we think that the way that we look in the mirror is so straightforward, like we're reading downwards on a poem. And then when we actually look deeper into ourselves, because we have to look inwards, sometimes that involves reading the poem a different way, or reading ourselves a different way, like reading it backwards. So I just thought that was really cool. So as readers, we get to decipher what we think about it, which is part of readers' response. So reading poetry comes with uncovering hidden meanings, because every word in a poem is placed in a certain way for a certain reason. Maybe the way that the stanzas or rhyme scheme is structured stands out to you, or the imagery being used speaks for itself. I found that explicating a poem really helps me to better understand a poem. And I would like to make an entire video on how to explicate a poem. I probably put it into my writing in school playlist, so the next time you have to it's hard to say. The next time you have to explicate a poem for school, it'll be there for you. And again, I was forced to do this for school assignments, but it allowed me to get my thoughts of the poem out on paper. And it was after I started reading and explicating poetry that I actually developed the urge to write more of it. So go buy some poetry books and give them a read. Authors I would recommend are Mary Oliver, Margaret Atwood, Carol Ann Duffy, and Robert Frost. I would also recommend Mary Oliver's A Poetry Handbook because it really goes into even more detail about what poetry is. Number 2, don't be afraid to start small. If you're just starting out writing poetry, it does not have to be complicated at first. It can just be writing a few lines and seeing how they sound, and then adding more as you get more inspired, which also gets more meaning out of it. It's honestly hard to tell how to start a poem and finish a poem. But if you're just starting out, you can really just free write. After you've found out more about the basics of poetry, you can start incorporating literary elements like similes, metaphors, personification, onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia, is that how you say it? I will never learn how to correctly say that word. Play around with stories, maybe from your childhood, and practice giving your poem structure, whether it's free verse or rhymed. Try using imagery to give your poem more meaning, and incorporate all of those sensory details. Maybe even try writing a poem a day, which will help you get even better at it. And once you're ready for someone to read your work, don't be afraid of criticism because it's only going to help you get better at poetry. I, for one, love writing poetry, and I recently had 2 of my poems published in my school's magazine, Prairie Voices, links in the description.
If you do look them up, you will find out my real name,
But it was fulfilling to have my poems read, and I got to read them in front of people, something I'd never done before. And it was after learning what I could do to improve my poetry, and there is still a lot that I can do to improve them, I gotta be honest. I've read through other poems that I've read and I have no idea what's going on. So we all have a ways to go, but we got this. Number 3, some tips and tools. Some of the tips that I've learned to follow when analyzing or writing poetry are the 4 elements of poetry. So looking for or applying a story, if any, structure, imagery, and then meaning. If you can find it, sometimes it's hard. Yeah, for reading or writing poetry, you have to savor the words and mull everything over in your head until something makes sense, and then follow the string of words until you find something, and it could be anything. It's really confusing, but it's usually some kind of idea that can be universal, or maybe only certain people can relate to it. It can be any number of things, so yeah, it can be anything. But yeah, just be aware of the story you're telling, be aware of who the speaker is. Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else, maybe you're telling a story in someone else's perspective. Is there a cliffhanger that's up for interpretation, or is there a concrete ending? Is it a story at all, or is it just an idea that you want to get across? Then know the kinds of structures that you can apply. So be aware of iambs and meter and the number of stanzas and however many lines you want to have in your poem. Is your poem rhymed? Is it free verse? Are you trying to compose a sonnet? Is there a meaning to the stanzas? If so, how can you express that meaning through the words of the poem? For imagery, incorporate literary elements, sensory descriptions, and figurative language. What is the tone of the poem? Is there anything euphonious or cacophonous about it? Play with whatever you have or that you've studied in your poetic arsenal, if you will, and just see how it sounds. And as for the meaning of the poem, I know you might still be interpreting it. I'm still interpreting some of the poems that I wrote a long time ago. I have no idea what I was talking about. I do like to be ambiguous and speak in riddles that I can't even uncover. So what I would suggest, and probably what I need to work on as well, is writing the meaning of the poem before or even after you've written it, just to remember what you meant. If you're a confusing person that confuses themselves like me, maybe write the meaning of the poem on a separate piece of paper or in a journal so no one ever finds out. Then you can put it in a safe and bury it underground. When the time comes and someone finds out about where you've buried it, burn it, and
the secret will die with you.
Or maybe you could do what I sometimes do and act like the poem has meaning. I am a very amateur poet, so again, we all have growing to do. And those are just some of the ways that you can begin and practice writing poetry. I hope this helped anyone who is looking for some advice on writing, and this is just my take on the subject. There are plenty of other ways to look at this concept, and you can modify my advice however you'd like. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video with your friends and fellow writers to help grow our introverted writing community. Comment down below what you love about being an introvert, a writer, or even a fan of a certain fandom. I would love to start a discussion or a rant in the comments section. Well, that's all for now, folks. Hope you enjoyed the video. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, check out my blog, and find the writing help you need on my Fiverr account. All the links will be in the description below. And stay basic. Okay, bye!